I am not against astrology or tarot. They can be very efficient reflection tools. But the moment future predictions start to cause more anxiety and depression, that's where this video's point comes in. Throughout this episode, I use astrology as the primary example, but many of these ideas apply also to other intuitive and symbolic practices, such as tarot or psychic readings. The control astrology seems to provide over our future is pure illusion. The only thing you have control over is your choices, your actions, and your efforts. That is clinically at the core of having better mental health, known as internal locus of control. Astrology leans heavily toward the opposite, external locus of control. It means that our future, our life, is dictated by outside forces, and that correlates with higher anxiety and poorer mental health. Astrology makes it seem like you can prepare for all things that are about to come. But think about it. How exhausting is it to constantly try to balance the astrologer's authority and your personal agency? They say this will happen and that will happen. In order for you to keep your head okay, you need to consciously decide on the go whether you believe it, how you will behave if it happens, and if it doesn't happen, what if it does? Even advanced students have to consider, did the astrologer notice this aspect, that conjunction, that yoga, and mitigating factors that possibly changes the whole prediction? When we lose our agency, that causes anxiety. Is life truly about living in worry and fear of the future? What if the prediction is telling about difficult times ahead, while what really would have been without this prediction was a way more positive or neutral experience? When you let the future or your life be dictated beforehand, it robs you of your true experience you could have had, which at the same time erodes trust in yourself. The opposite to that is a more empowering way to experience life as it happens, knowing that whatever the experience is, you have the tools to navigate it. To move forward, we need to understand the place you are in when you seek safety in predictions. And that is the root of it all that needs our attention. The safety we crave in an unpredictable world. Difficult times can come around the corner unexpectedly and take you by surprise. The need to know these possible negative experiences beforehand is very human and natural. But does it truly bring more security, or does it actually lead to dependency and anxiety? Now this next section shows what we find when astrology is actually analyzed and seen logically as it is, when it is being stripped of its magical language and mysticism. We will see why many believe it, and what makes it so convincing that it can even dictate our life. And I want to make clear, I know it might sound like I am trying to prove astrology wrong, but I have no interest in telling you what to believe in or not. This is simply to see it more clearly and reduce its power over you. My agenda here is to have your peace of mind back. Let's first look at the studies done to see whether astrology predictions actually were correct or not. I will also link these studies below. The Carlson double-blind test, 1985, published in the peer-reviewed scientific journal Nature. Physicist Sean Carlson orchestrated what is widely considered the gold standard test of natal astrology. The study involved 28 professional astrologers who were highly respected by their peers. They were given the natal charts of 116 real participants. For each natal chart, the astrologers were given 3 objective personality profiles, 1 belonging to the actual person and 2 random controls. The astrologers were tasked with matching the chart to the correct profile. They confidently predicted they would achieve a success rate of 50% or higher. Instead, they selected the correct profile exactly 34% of the time, which is the exact mathematical baseline for guessing randomly out of 3 choices. The second one, researcher Geoffrey Dean, a former astrologer turned researcher, and psychologist Ivan Kelly conducted extensive meta-analyses, studies that pool data from hundreds of previous experiments spanning several decades. They evaluated the collective result of over 1,000 empirical studies testing various facets of astrology, including personality matching, forecasting future events, and compatibility. The result: across thousands of subjects, no consistent or replicable evidence was found supporting the validity of astrological predictions. The study concluded that positive astrological experiences are driven by psychological artifacts, like the Barnum effect. The tendency to believe vague, general statements applies specifically to oneself, and cognitive biases rather than objective accuracy. Now, speaking of objective truth, this next study shows something interesting. A more recent massive study conducted by the organization ClearerThinking put 152 professional and experienced astrologers to the test to see if modern practices yielded different results. Astrologers were given 12 specific tasks where they had to match an individual's precise birth chart to extensive life data and personality questionnaires filled out by that real person. The result: just like the Carlson study, the astrologers scored an average of 2.4 out of 12 correct answers, which perfectly mirrors a 20% random guessing probability. Experienced astrologers performed no better than novices, and perhaps the most tellingly, the astrologers rarely agreed with each other on what the correct charts were, showing low consistency in interpretation. Now the last one. Geoffrey Dean also led a profound study analyzing time twins, individuals born at almost the exact same time and geographical location. The study tracked over 2,000 individuals born in London within minutes of each other in March 1958. According to astrological theory, these individuals should share remarkably similar life paths, personalities, and major life events. The researchers tracked more than 110 physical, psychological, and behavioral characteristics across decades as the participants grew up. The data showed zero correlation or similarity between the time twins that could be attributed to their shared birth time. Their career paths, marital success, accident rates, and IQ scores varied just as much as those of people born on entirely different days. I can already hear the explanation astrologers have for this. For example, the time twin study can be explained by Vedic divisional charts, where the main natal chart is divided into smaller, more detailed charts, and that shows why the individuals had such different life paths. But here's the thing. Astrological systems have an overwhelming number of variables. The presence of endless rules, exceptions, and disclaimers is the exact mechanism that prevent astrology from ever being inaccurate. If a system has a built-in disclaimer for every single failure, it is structured to protect itself rather than reveal objective truth. And what if those who came up with new astrology systems did that because the one they previously followed wasn't actually that accurate, so they invented their own? We find so many different schools of astrology, different house systems, all that can be used to describe why people's life turned out the way they did. Also, have you noticed that when you get a reading of, for example, a Vedic sidereal astrology and Western astrology, the both charts seem to fit you, even when you use different house systems, Placidus or whole house system, it all seemed to fit. The primary psychological driver behind the feeling of accuracy is the Barnum effect. It is a psychological phenomenon where individuals accept broad, vague generalizations as highly accurate, personalized descriptions of themselves. In 1948, psychologist Barnum demonstrated this by giving students a personality test. He ignored their answers and gave every student the exact same generic description compiled from astrology columns. The students rated the profile's accuracy an average of 4.26 out of 5, proving that people mistake universal statements for highly specific personal insights. To see this for yourself, listen to these following examples of the language astrology uses to describe the personality profiles, and notice how you can find yourself in almost each of the statements, if not in all. Note also how powerful it is to speak directly to you, using you as the subject. You operate with a primary focus on tangible reality, physical security, and material stability. You process information slowly and systematically. You resist rapid changes or sudden disruptions to your established routine. You hold deep, unshakable personal values and morals. Movement keeps your mind fresh. Your home is your sanctuary. Your past heavily shapes who you are today. You are naturally introspective and protective of your inner life. These traits listed seem specific, but statistically, they represent common human traits and experiences. The human brain is an advanced pattern recognition system that constantly attempts to organize disconnected information into a cohesive narrative. When you read a vague archetypical description, your brain automatically searches your memory for specific life events, choices, or traits that validate that claim. Because you supply the specific evidence from your own biography, the empty template feels personally tailored to you. Furthermore, humans have an initial cognitive default to accept information as true and meaningful in order to process it. Overcoming this bias requires secondary conscious effort. Some individuals simply possess a stronger baseline expectation of meaningfulness, causing us to accept impressive sounding text at face value without questioning it. Some people mistake the abstract nature of statement for a sign of higher intelligence or deep spiritual truth, rather than recognizing it as a lack of clarity. Another thing that happens is subjective validation. It occurs when a person considers information to be correct because it has personal significance to them, or it aligns with a desire for a specific need, for example, reassurance. If the placements are yours, your brain automatically accepts it as true in order to process it. So when you read a description that matches your lived reality, your brain recognizes the truth of that experience and creates a strong sense of accuracy. But if you were given a wrong chart stating your sun was in a different house, but described an element of your life you can recognize, your brain would still validate it because the underlying experience is real, mistaking it as your sign and truth. Just out of curiosity, you can try this. Listen to signs other than your sun, moon, or rising, you will see that the predictions often apply to you just as much as your own signs do. And this is explained by saying that we all have all signs in us. But when you strip away the mystical elements of astrology, what you are left with is a map of the shared human experience. The reason so many different parts of a birth chart can feel deeply relatable is exactly because the core traits, struggles, and emotions described in astrology exist as potentials within almost every human being. In psychology, it is recognized that human personalities are not entirely distinct, isolated islands. We all share a foundational set of emotional and psychological capacities. Every single person possesses the capacity to be assertive, Aries, expressive, Leo, protective, Scorpio, organized, Virgo, or empathetic, Pisces. When you read a specific placement, you are looking at a mirror of a universal human trait. And because you have experienced that trait at some point in your life, your brain recognizes it, maps it to your identity, and validates it. You can see how you could be that way, because as a human being, you already possess the capacity for that behavior. Carl Jung noted that the zodiac signs and planets are more so ancient cultural symbols representing these universal human archetypes: the warrior, the ruler, the healer, the transformer. When you read your chart, you are recognizing an archetype that exists within the collective human story, which is why it feels so profoundly real. Astrology provides 12 distinct doors into the house of human personality. Because we are all part of the same human fabric, you can walk through almost any of those doors and find a piece of yourself inside. And this is absolutely fine, but the stress comes when the shadow sides of these signs are introduced. Self-fulfilling prophecies. And this leads to several complications. Imagine what this does to a person who has heard a description of their placements telling them how unfavorable their chart is. The battle is between their own sense of self and the astrologer's seemingly higher knowledge about them. Studies show that people who know astrology well often begin to score higher on personality traits associated with their sign. They are not necessarily born with those traits. Rather, they have systematically altered their self-concept to align with the archetypical description they internalized over time. The exact same thing happens when a child is given a name. They are also at the same time handed a pre-existing package of cultural stereotypes, traits, and expectations associated with that name. This phenomenon is known as the Dorian Gray effect, where internal expectations or identity choices eventually alter external physical appearance or behavior. So you see how flexible our personality traits truly are. If an astrologer labels a person as impulsive or unsuited for management, the individual may subconsciously modify their behavior to match the description. In the most dangerous way, this shapes a person's identity and life in ways that can diminish who they truly are. Confirmation bias comes here too. People naturally focus on data that confirms their existing assumptions while ignoring data that contradicts them. So because we see the potential for us to be that way, astrologer tells you it is in you. That trait essentially becomes more ingrained into your identity, the good and the bad. Then also, because a person will remember the one time a horoscope correctly predicted one specific event, but we naturally forget the dozens of times it was incorrect, because our memory can't hold all the predictions in our head. That reinforces an inaccurate worldview that astrology is speaking the truth of yourself or your life. Now we need to understand the state of your mind when you turn to astrology. It is very rare that we are happy and content with life when we seek predictions. It is the opposite. It's a coping mechanism for stressful times. This stress that already exists creates a perfect loop for leaning onto astrology predictions, needing recurring affirmation and reassurance that life will turn out well and the worst case scenario doesn't come to life. A seminal study by Lindquist and Lindemann in 1998 found that an individual's interest in astrology correlates strongly with the number of personal crises they are experiencing. Individuals typically seek out occult services during periods of severe instability, such as romantic rejection, financial failure, or the death of a family member. When a person experiences a crisis, human biology triggers a distress response to the lack of control. In these crisis states, the human brain experiences an increased desire for certainty and closure. Astrology offsets this by reframing chaotic events as part of predetermined cosmic timeline, reducing immediate anxiety. That's okay. However, another study found that 36.3% of pseudoscience believers met the clinical criteria for depression. This is significantly higher than baseline depression averages found in the general global population, because astrology and psychic readings claim to offer answers about unknown future events and personality traits. Individuals experiencing the emotional toll of depression are disproportionately drawn to them as an accessible, non-clinical coping mechanism. However, relying on these forecasts can create a counterproductive loop. It temporarily eases anxiety, but ultimately reinforces an external locus of control, which further increases anxiety and leaves the underlying depressive symptoms unaddressed. In these vulnerable states, we risk forming a dependency on these predictions, and this is known as the fortune-telling addiction, a documented psychological pattern where individuals experience anxiety, cravings, and distress if we cannot consult an astrological source before making daily or bigger choices. But what this essentially does is it replaces healthy self-reliance with compulsive reassurance seeking, further strengthens the belief that you cannot make choices or decisions by yourself. Another thing worth mentioning is this closely touches on dopamine addiction. To create the content, astrologers build hype around future transits. Quote, "This month is so special," unquote. But when that time comes, nothing really that special happens, because the predictions are so vague and theme-based. This leaves you hooked, waiting for the next big breakthrough, because it always is promised. In the next video about a rare full moon, that is when everything changes. You can see how psychologically manipulating this is, keeping you in needing to know the next one and the next one. Rarely do you conclude when the transit happens that the astrology was inaccurate. Because the statement was so vague, your brain looks for evidence that the prediction was accurate. But when we overcome this addiction, it can result in a profound sense of getting one's life back feeling. And here is how you do it. You ask, what makes my life inherently so unsafe that I need to know the future? This targets the underlying driver of the behavior, intolerance of uncertainty. When you feel a compulsive need to check predictions, the chart or the fortune teller is not the actual issue. The issue is an underlying feeling of existential or emotional unsafety. This unsafety usually stems from past trauma, unstable environments, or a lack of emotional regulation tools. By asking this question, You stop trying to control the external future and instead address the internal vulnerability. You identify the specific fear that is driving the panic, such as fear of abandonment, financial ruin, or failure. And then we shift from an external into an internal locus of control. Listen to these examples. This is external locus. I need to know if this relationship will work out so I don't get hurt. Shifting this to internal locus. I cannot predict this person's choices, but I can choose my own boundaries. The transits say this month will be full of conflict, so I must hide. Shifting this to if conflict arises this month, I have the communication skills to handle it. Another example. My chart dictates my inherent flaws and my inevitable destiny. Shifting this to my chart is a set of symbols. My daily choices dictate my character. When we stop relying and consulting predictions, we transition from a passive observer of a predetermined fate back into an active decision maker. This return of agency allows us to credit ourselves for our achievements and take constructive responsibility for our mistakes, which directly builds authentic self-esteem. If you do love the language of astrology, there is a way to use it constructively. We can use astrology to make sense of the world and develop a language for things that happen. If it truly brings peace of mind to know that what's below is above, then that's a way to go. It can help contextualize struggles and reduce stress by viewing a difficult period as a temporary cosmic transit. Maybe reframing a painful, chaotic situation as a meaningful period of mandatory growth. Psychologists note that people frequently use astrology not to predict the future, but as a symbolic language to organize their present reality. For individuals with high scores in the Big Five personality trait, openness to experience, which involves imagination, curiosity, and an interest in abstract ideas, astrology provides a tool for self-exploration. Because we human beings often struggle to analyze our thoughts and emotions without a starting point, astrology provides a structured set of themes, such as career goals, relationship patterns, or personal boundaries, that force us to reflect on our own life. Because reading a birth chart or a horoscope encourages you to look for positive traits within yourself that you might otherwise overlook, it can act as an informal psychological tool for self-verification. And studies show that engaging with astrology increases a person's certainty about their own positive attributes. But it can also increase negative manifestations. So the key is to remain in charge of your own sense of self and your decisions. Use it as a reflection tool and avoid letting it take power over your agency and life. You might be interested in learning more about internal locus of control, as it directly correlates with better mental health. I have made a video about AI dependency, which goes deeper into AI and our mental health. The other video here goes more in depth about dopamine. It explores long-lasting dopamine versus quick dopamine hits. That might be interesting to learn too. I wish you all the best.